Breath of Fire is a series originally debuted in 1993 on the Super Nintendo, known in Japan as Breath of Fire: The Dragon Warrior. A year later, in 1994, it was localized for the West and it lost its subtitle. Breath of Fire 2 would later release in North America in 1995, and then the third game in the series would later be released on the Sony PlayStation on September 11th, 1997. Something that set Breath of Fire apart from its competitors on the Super Nintendo was the game used much more detailed, realistically proportioned sprites for your characters during combat. In similar fashion to Final Fantasy VII's Lego block monster people being used for overworld exploration and then cool realistic sprites for combat. This was fairly unique for its time, when even Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy would just use the same sprites in and out of combat. Another interesting note is each Breath of Fire game has its own standalone story, but each game's main character is named Ryu, and each Ryu meets a girl named Nina, and every Breath of Fire game has a location named Windia. However, none of these Ryus, Ninas, or Windias are the same. The games making up the Breath of Fire series never sold that well. It didn't help that each entry into the series fell victim to that whole horrible looking box artwork thing that was going on in North America. I always thought that by the PlayStation era, the people behind these decisions had all been fired, but apparently not, because this is the cover art for Breath of Fire 3. Breath of Fire 3 opens up with the player taking control of a dragon that is awakened deep within a mine. The dragon attempts to fight its way out of the mine, but is eventually captured by the miners and put into a cage and loaded up onto a train. At the last moment, the dragon rocks its cage back and forth, tumbling off the side of the train and down a hill. A short while later, the game skips ahead to a scene of a young half-tiger, half-man hunting for food. Searching for the commotion that startled his prey, the young half-tiger, half-man finds a young boy unconscious next to a broken cage about to be attacked by wolves. The tiger kid steps in and fights off the wolves and then carries the young unconscious boy home. Eventually, the little boy wakes up alone in a cabin and wanders off to find the person that saved him. Eventually, we're introduced to Ray, the half-tiger, half-man, and his friend Tipo, and learn our main protagonist's name, Ryu. And this is how our journey into Breath of Fire begins. Breath of Fire can really be divided up into two sections, Ryu and his friends' adventures as kids, and then their adventures as adults, in sort of a similar fashion to The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The first half of the game, when you're playing as a young Ryu, the game maintains a childlike tone with plenty of comedic events until things begin taking a turn for the worse. Eventually, all the mischief Ryu and his friends stir up come back to haunt them, in some of the worst ways you can imagine. Eventually, after breaking into the governor's home and stealing back all the people's tax money in a very noble Robin Hood fashion, the authorities track down Ryu, Tipo, and Ray's hideout and light it on fire right as the three boys are returning home. The group is cornered and each would go down fighting. Eventually, we would learn that Ryu survives, having been nursed back to health by the boy's old mentor, Bunyan. Ryu, unsure of the fate of his friends, sets off for the kingdom of Windia in search of Ray and Tipo, with the local authorities hot on his tail the entire time. Ryu is eventually cornered by the people that are after him, and again is overpowered in battle, but just as it appears that Ryu is about to die, for the second time, he transforms back into a dragon, the dragon from the beginning of the game, and manages to escape death yet again. Some time would pass, but Ryu would once again be captured, now by a band of thugs that heard about this magical dragon person wandering around the lands. Now, Ryu's not only a criminal, but also a monster. Eventually, while in captivity, Ryu is forced to participate in a fighting tournament. There, he is quote-unquote won by a large lizard man named Gar. A scared and alone Ryu befriends Gar and begins to trust him. Gar would eventually lead Ryu to a special shrine where Gar shares with Ryu the truth behind Ryu's special powers, and that it is Gar's destiny to kill Ryu's species. This final tragedy sends Ryu into a frenzy, and he once again transforms into a dragon and escapes, and returns to the cave in which the player first meets him, as he returns to sleep. And it's at this point that the game transitions into its second act. Many years will go by before Ryu would be awoken yet again, this time by Gar, who's had a change of heart about fulfilling his destiny as a guardian and ridding the world of Ryu's species known as the Brood. Together, the two set out on a journey to find God and to learn the truth about the Brood and why Gar's species was tasked with ridding the planet of them. Together, Gar and Ryu reunite with Ryu's old friends from his childhood, each of which is different now, for better or for worse. All of his friends but Tipo, who Ray was never able to track down after the three were separated many years ago. Breath of Fire 3 actually has a lot of content to unpack, and a lot of it's completely missable as well. From a fishing minigame that's so fleshed out it could have almost been its own standalone game, to helping a group of fairies build a village by helping them manage their community. There's a lot to do, but the game won't show you everything, so always be sure to explore. A huge feature in Breath of Fire 3 that I have yet to come across in any other JRPGs is the mentor system. Spread throughout the game, there are a handful of NPCs that agree to take you and your party members on as their apprentice. After leveling up a predetermined number of times while apprenticing under a mentor, your mentor may also teach you new skills or abilities that you can't obtain any other way, so choose wisely. There are even several secret mentors hidden across the land that will only take you under their wing if you meet specific requirements. Breath of Fire 3 doesn't really innovate typical JRPG combat in any spectacular way, other than a few characters having the ability to transform mid-battle into a more powerful form. Ryu has the ability to transform into several different dragons if you locate the dragon genes spread throughout the game's world. Rei also eventually obtains the ability to transform into a powerful werewolf tiger, which allows him to deal massive amounts of damage, but he essentially goes berserk. Not only do you lose control of him, but he can actually attack your party members as well. It would have been cool to see more characters get some sort of transformation ability. It would have been great to see more characters than just Ryu and Rei have this ability, but that's all we get. Like maybe Nina turning into an angel, or Momo climbing into a giant mech, or even Pico maybe turning into a tree, I guess? Breath of Fire 3 has random encounters with monsters that don't show up on the screen until combat begins. However, much like Chrono Trigger, combat takes place in the same environment you're exploring. So in other words, there isn't a loading screen that takes you into a new environment during combat. This is always a welcome feature, however it does cause some rather wacky situations, because the game's environments are all three-dimensional. So sometimes you'll be fighting monsters that you can't see because their sprites spawn in behind walls or other objects in the environment. This also means there are certain situations and areas involving hallways in which a character or two may appear like they're fighting a wall. I can't really rip on the game too hard for this because it doesn't really affect combat in any way. Breath of Fire 3 also features an auto battle option you can select. It can be useful at times, but it essentially just has all of your characters do a basic physical attack until either you defeat your enemy or your entire party dies. Something I did find kinda strange about Breath of Fire 3's combat system is the way in which your characters gain new abilities. Abilities are gained from several different ways in the game. Most of your characters seem to learn a handful of abilities just through leveling up. Then there are also abilities obtained from apprenticing under different mentors. These abilities tend to be a little more important and more powerful. There are also tons of abilities you can learn from using the Observe command on monsters during combat, similar to Final Fantasy's Blue Magic. I do have to say, during my playthrough, it never seemed like magic abilities ever did any sort of legitimate damage to enemies. However, this is likely due to the fact that during the majority of my run, I didn't utilize the apprentice system effectively. Status attacks also almost consistently always failed when I tried to use them, which got a little frustrating because Breath of Fire 3 seems to have a pretty big focus on casting status ailments onto your party, as well as having many monsters that are impervious to physical attacks and can only be defeated by magic. Even though Breath of Fire 3 has a fairly shonen-esque, easy-to-digest story, there are a few legitimate difficulty spikes here and there that you should watch out for. Healing items are also extremely rare in this game for some reason, at least the good ones. During my entire playthrough, I only found around 4 items total that could restore my ability points, which are the points you need to do basically anything other than physical attacks. I also found maybe 2 or 3 multivitamins during the entire game. That's the Breath of Fire 3 equivalent to Mega Elixirs, kind of. To make matters worse, when a character goes down in battle, their maximum HP drops until you rest at an inn. I can't talk about this game's difficulty unless I also mention my experience with this game's RNG. I kid you not, I literally used an ammonia on Rei, which is like a phoenix down, just for the enemy to kill him again almost immediately, like 7 times in a row. No joke, the stream archive is somewhere on my channel if you don't believe me. It also took me 2 attempts to defeat this game's final boss, and yes, for the second attempt I did level up a few times, but the final boss behaved completely differently and barely put up a fight, and used its weakest attacks over and over again. Point being, don't mistake Breath of Fire 3's innocent childhood adventures at the start for a sign of it being an easy game. It's definitely a healthy challenge, or at least it was for me. Personally, I think Breath of Fire 3's biggest weakness is its rather weak cast of playable characters. Ryu, of course, is a great character for a silent protagonist. I was definitely impressed with the writer's ability to formulate a great story utilizing other characters' interactions with Ryu. And in that regard, Breath of Fire 3's writing is on par with Chrono Trigger for sure. Then there's Rei, who also has tons of depth and a very well fleshed out personality. He also has a ton of character progression between the first and second halves of the game. Really outside of these two, there's only Nina, Momo, Gar, and Pico. Nina essentially becomes useless and she really doesn't have any purpose in the story other than being Ryu's friend. she essentially becomes unusable pretty quickly into the game's second half. Momo suffers a pretty similar fate to Nina. In fact, she has even less of a place in the game's plot. Right before the final boss fight, you're given an opportunity to talk to each of your party members, and her final bit of dialogue in the game is, "I don't know, I just fix stuff." She hits pretty hard, but her accuracy stat is abysmal. Outside of that, she has a few healing spells, but at this point in the game, Ryu already has that covered. Gar plays a pretty pivotal part in the game's overall plot, but he's slower than Koggle from Legend of Dragoon. Then finally there's Pico. He's a mutated onion that has the face of the diabetes meme guy. He's pretty much an abomination that should be put down. I fully expected Pico to be a useless joke type of character for some kind of reason, but boy was I wrong. Just play the game, you'll see what I mean. Breath of Fire 3 also has by far the best looking 2D sprites I've ever seen. There's a ridiculous amount of detail that's put into every character sprite and monster sprite alike. Almost every single character in your party has a goofy little animation if you stop walking and just sit and wait long enough. There are also adorable little animations that pop up above their head every once in a while when they're talking to each other. The game's 3D polygonal backgrounds also look absolutely amazing, especially any time you're inside of a forested area. Towns look great too, but sometimes they can get a little hard to navigate. And by far, the thing I love the most about this game is how immersive it is. Whenever you're out on the game's world map, you have the ability to set up camp. And setting up camp is not just a screen fading to black with a relaxing jingle either. You actually set up a campsite and can sit around the fire with your friends and discuss the journey so far, which adds even more depth to the game's characters. You're actually able to go inside of your tent and talk to other characters inside of there, as well as access a few menus only accessible when camping. Camping works similar to staying at inns, but your characters won't fully recover when camping. There are also several scenes where the characters sit around a table at the Kingdom of Windia and chow down on a big feast. It's the little immersive details like this that really make me fall in love with the game, and I'm not sure why that is. In conclusion, Breath of Fire is sort of an anomaly. It was developed by Capcom, which gave us Street Fighter, Final Fight, Mega Man, The Magical Quest of Mickey Mouse, and other games. It was developed in response to the rising popularity of JRPGs. Typically under these conditions, a company that wants to make a quick buck and a demand for a product would result in a pretty low quality product made by people that have no idea what they're doing and don't really care. Kind of like EA ruining Star Wars, Command & Conquer, Oddworld, Need for Speed, Titanfall, SimCity, Mass Effect, Medal of Honor, and Dead Space, but surprisingly, despite being a company known for fighting games and platformers and wanting to get a slice of that JRPG pie, we actually ended up getting something really great. I feel like the best way to sum up how I feel about this game is, and I'm not exactly sure how to say it, but Breath of Fire 3 really just kind of feels like home in a weird way. The simple and wholesome plot, the childhood antics, coming to terms with growing up and facing your future, all of that kind of stuff. Playing through this game made me feel like a kid again in 1990-something, hanging out with my friends after school eating 3D Doritos and waiting for Dragon Ball Z to come on Toonami. And that's something I really needed in 2020, and that's why I think you should give this series a shot. I'll see you guys in the next review.